They nailed a sign to my fence claiming my family's road was community access and gave me 24 hours before fines and liens kicked in. When I walked up my lane, the notice hung crooked like an insult. A red stripe screamed, "Response required in 24 hours." My own farm road, built by my father's tractor, was suddenly stamped as theirs. But the lie cracked fast. My brother the sheriff read an injunction and taped the county's order to their office door. The flagpole rattled above us, neighbors clapping steady. "Let me take you back." I turned onto our farm road and found a fresh HOA sign bolted into my fence post. The manager stood beside it with a clipboard and a smile that looked like it had practice hours. "Good morning, Mr. Harlan," she said, tapping the metal. "Per the covenants, this road is now designated community access." "It's not community," I said. "It's ours." My father graded this lane with a borrowed tractor and a prayer. She lifted a manila folder and slid a sheet out with 2 fingers. Bylaws, Section 6.4. Temporary easement. Will need compliance by end of day. Daily fines accrue tomorrow. Behind her, the church bell carried across the pasture 1, 2, 3 notes, like it was counting for both of us. I set my thermos on the porch rail. A thin thread of steam rose, then wavered in the light. "Who voted this?" I asked. "Administrative authority," she said. "The board concluded it's in the interest of property values. We'll have signage maintenance fees and, if necessary, a special assessment." Over my road, she turned the folder toward me. Inside a map, shaded beige where the lane ran from the county blacktop to my barn. "Here's the plat overlay," she said. "You'll see the corridor marked as common." "That's my fence post," I said, pointing at a tiny square labeled like a footnote. "You can see the old corner. There's a pin in the ditch just under the willow roots." "Anecdotal," she said, and her smile brightened. "We prefer recorded. What I prefer is honest," I said. She reached for the sign with a small wrench and snugged one lag bolt. "We'll also need you to remove any obstructions, chain sawhorses, decorative elements that block ingress. If you don't, we invoice. If you still don't lien." "My mailbox has the family name on it," I said. "It can share," she said. "Please don't make this adversarial." The QR code on the notice winked like a pupil. There was a red bar along the top, "Response required in 24 hours. I could feel it ticking, though nothing moved but grass. "Show me the vote minutes," I said. "They'll be available after they're approved." "So never." "Soon," she said. "We're modernizing. Our partner portal streamlines community standards. People expect order. People expect roads not to move," I said. She glanced at my boots and then at the dust on my truck fender like she was taking inventory. "Look, Mr. Harlan, you can email your concern. There's a ticket number on the notice." "Email won't stop a sign," I said. "Who drove out here at dawn to hang this vendors?" she said. "We outsource where appropriate." I crouched at the fence base and brushed away gravel. There, near the willow shade, something iron peered up through the dirt, no more than a button of rust. I didn't touch it. I just looked at it long enough to know I wasn't imagining. There I said, "Corner iron." She didn't look. I can't engage in formal boundary disputes. If you claim a contradiction, you file a request for clarification, provide the survey, and await a determination. "How long?" "Depends on workload," she said. "You'll want to comply in the meantime." "So, I let strangers run their SUVs down by my barn because your printer drew a beige rectangle." She loosened a breath. "Please keep your tone civil." "Civil is a paved road," I said. "This is dirt and memory, and a family that paid taxes on every inch." She slid a second sheet out, glossy. "If there's damage during community use, you can file a claim." "Against who? The association," she said. "But let's not assume the worst. I usually don't." I said until it's bolted into my fence. She tightened the other lag bolt. The metal squealed like that one bell on the church that needs grease every winter. The sound crawled up the post and into my teeth. "What happens if I take the sign down?" I asked. "Then we put it back," she said, "and the fine schedule accelerates. We'd hate to escalate. We always prefer cooperation. Cooperation goes both ways." "Exactly," she said, as if I'd agreed with her. "So, you'll keep it in place?" "I'll keep it where it belongs," I said. She held up her phone and took a photo of the sign, the fence, my porch. Documentation, she said. We document everything. Oh, and if you open the QR code, you'll find a helpful guide for compliant messaging so your emails hit the right queue. My emails go to people I said. We all do our part, she said lightly. I'll leave the folder for your review. You keep it, I said. It smells like toner. Her smile tightened a half-inch. Then at least scan the notice. There's a barcode with your parcel number. I know my parcel number, I said, and said it aloud from memory. She checked and nodded surprised. We looked at each other the way you look at a stoplight that skips a turn. The wind pushed the pasture in one direction and then the other. The steam thread from my coffee thinned, broke, and vanished. She tapped the red stripe with a lacquered nail. 24 hours, she said. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. Non-compliance triggers daily assessment $50 per day plus administrative fees. $50 to borrow my road, I said. That's cheaper than I charged my kids to borrow the truck. You're a funny man, she said, not laughing. You'll find we're firm and fair. Firm. I see, I said, glancing at the bolts. We'll see about fair. She stepped back, admiring the sign like a decorator admiring a curtain rod. It's a simple matter of standards. Community thrives when everyone follows the same rules. Community also thrives when folks ask before they take, I said. That's what the notice is, she said. An ask. That's a bolt, I said. She tucked the wrench into a canvas pouch and handed me a single-page printout with a perforated strip at the bottom. Tear-off instructions, she said. If you need help scanning the code, the clerk at the post office can assist. I can scan a code, I said. I can also read a deed. Great, she said, almost cheerful. Read fast. I watched her walk to a white SUV that had no dust on it at all. She drove away over the cattle guard without slowing. The sign flashed once in the sun square and satisfied. I took the notice to the porch and laid it beside my thermos edge aligned like it might behave better if it looked organized. The QR code sat there like a dare. I picked up my phone and held it over the paper. Then I lowered it again. 24 hours. I said to the willow, and the willow didn't disagree. The post office door, stuck like always then, gave with a bell that sounded a little too proud for the size of the room. On the counter, propped against a plastic outgoing bin, a certified envelope sat with my name and a red stripe that looked like a warning flare someone forgot to put out. Morning, Walt, said Doris behind the scale. Got a certified for you. Sign here, honey. I signed the narrow green card. The pen they chained to the counter wrote like it had grit in it. What's the rush color for? I asked. Sender paid for attention, Doris said. That stripe's not legal. It's marketing. She slid the envelope across. Feels thick. I eased one corner open and let the paper breathe. Inside lay a county plat copy with the HOA letter stapled at a slant and a sticky note, "Please respond via portal." The map showed my farm road shaded beige from the blacktop to the barn like somebody had taken a highlighter through my family history. A fluorescent tube buzzed overhead, steady as a wasp trapped in a jelly jar. For a second, I just listened to the hum and my own breathing, then laid the plat flat against the counter glass. You know how to read those? Doris asked. Slowly, I said, and not when they're wrong. The seal looked wrong, flat ink, no bite. I ran my fingertip over it, no impression, just ink pretending to be authority. If a seal is flat, so is the truth, I said. What's that honey talking to the paper, I said. She leaned in. Whose seal? County, I said. And then, looks like county. We both glanced at the community bulletin board potluck at the parish hall. Thursday bake sale for the choir robes, someone selling a used rototiller that runs hot. The flyer corners curled like old leaves. Need me to scan anything, Doris said. The copier hates me, but I usually win. Not yet, I said. I might have to call the county first. She tapped an index card where she kept numbers. They rerouted lines. Everything's a phone tree now. Course it is. I took a stool at the end counter and dialed, pressing the receiver between shoulder and ear while I spread the plat beside the certified envelope. County records, please. I told the robot, then real person, then representative, then agent, like I was calling a travel agency from 1983. Finally, a voice came on, pleasant and tired. County records. "Morning," I said. "I'm looking at a plat copy for parcel." And I read the number I could say backward in my sleep. Question about the seal and a corridor shaded common. One moment, the woman said. Keyboard tapping came through like hail on a tin roof. I see an upload from Community Partnerships. That's an HOA management vendor, not county staff. So the county didn't stamp this it's marked received, she said. But the embossed seal goes on originals after review. Copies can print a placeholder. Where did you get yours? Certified envelope from the HOA, I said. Stapled at a slant. She said. We prefer perpendicular. I could hear the smile in it. If you're challenging an easement claim, you'll need the original survey and any field notes. They bury those in a salt mine, I said. In a basement, she said, which sometimes feels the same. You're welcome to submit a request. How long does a request take? Depends on workload, she said. You can also hire a surveyor to locate the boundary markers. There's an iron under the willow roots, I said. Been there since my daddy's knees could still climb. Then it's waiting to be measured, she said. Anything else today? Tell me something hopeful, I said. We still emboss with real metal, she said. Good luck, sir. I hung up and breathed. The fluorescent hum filled the quiet again. Doris slid a peppermint toward me like a reward for surviving the phone tree. Vendor upload, huh? She said. That's what she said. Those folks send more packages than Christmas, Doris said. Everything urgent, everything final. I held the plat up to the light to see if the paper would reveal anything it didn't want to. The shaded beige of the so-called corridor crossed the ditch and the willow straight as a ruler through places that weren't straight. My fence post appeared as a tiny square like a maze marker. The deed call I remembered south 47 degrees east 210 feet to a capped iron didn't match the line the beige insisted on. This line's pretending, I said. Want me to make you a copy? Doris asked. Please, with the corner enlarged, I said. I need to see that square grow up. The copier sighed awake, then complained like a tractor on a cold morning. Doris smacked the side, opened a tray, closed a tray, then handed me 2 pages the whole thing and a zoomed corner with my fence and the ditch like a little hand-drawn map. I laid the zoom next to the original and traced the sideline with my nail. Here, I said half to her, half to whatever clerk buried in the basement had once done this right. This should bypass common entirely. Doris nodded as if agreement made it official. You going to the parish potluck Thursday? She asked. Bring that and set it next to the green jello. Folks will have opinions. Folks always do, I said. The bulletin board flyer for the potluck had a line at the bottom. Bring your own serving spoon. I thought about spoons and how many we had lost to other people's casseroles. A chime on my phone announced email. I opened it. HOA, support, ticket, 9824, please use portal. The paragraph beneath sounded like it had been written by a robot that had watched too many courtroom dramas. Failure to comply may result in daily assessment and lien, I read aloud. Lien's a heavy word for paper, Doris said. It's the tone, I said, like being scolded by a toaster. The fluorescent hum took a breath, brightened, and then steadied. I bent over the zoomed corner and wrote in the white margin with Doris's chained pen. Who still knows the old records? It looked like a note to myself, which it was. It also looked like a prayer pinned to a bulletin board. Want a folder? Doris asked. Manila gives me hives, I said. But I'll take a bulldog clip. She clipped the pages together with a snap that felt more official than the printed seal. I tucked the certified envelope and copies under my arm and stared at the bulletin board again, choir robes, rototiller, potluck, and tried to line up the world to the paper. You look like you're about to do something stubborn, Doris said. Something accurate, I said. Got any names left from when the county still smelled like pencil shavings? She thought, eyes traveling the ceiling tiles like each had a memory filed inside. There was that clerk retired 2 years back, knew every deed call by heart. Used to come in here for stamps and talk boundaries like baseball stats. What was her name, I asked? Doris snapped her fingers softly, pleased when the sound found what it wanted. Lena, she said. Lena Whitcomb. I wrote it beside my question in the margin, underlining once, then twice. Miller's diner still smelled like last night's onions and a morning that was trying to forgive them. Lena slid into the booth across from me, set her tote down with a clerk's care, and tapped the folded deed I'd brought. "They skipped page 1, she said. I blinked. "That's the page with the legal description. That's the page with the actual description," she said, already uncapping a pen. "Where they turned your road into common access, that language can't outrun the metes and bounds." She spread the papers like a dealer who'd shuffled too many decks, stacking my copies deed, the HOA letter, and the certified plat on the slick formica. Coffee ring halos framed each pile as if the diner and I had blessed them in advance. The jukebox in the corner chattered 2 bars of an old ballad and then caught on a note that wouldn't end. It held there a silver thread of sound until the waitress slapped the side with a wet towel. The note gave up. The room exhaled. My hands did too. "Start with the deed," I said. She turned to an interior page. "No. Start with the cover. Whose name, what year, and any exceptions?" She ran her finger under the header. "Harlan Trust, recorded 1998 fee. Simple, accepting mineral rights reserved previous." She flipped. Now the meat. Her pen tapped short phrases as she read. "Beginning at a capped iron at the northeast corner of the parcel, thence south 47 degrees east 210 feet to an iron near the ditch by the willow." "The willow," I said, a little too grateful to see it living on paper. "The words tell you where the world should be," she said. "If the words say willow and the map says beige rectangle, I'll pick the words every single time." She slid over a thin page with a staple scar. "Look what your HOA sent you. A bylaws excerpt. Section 6.4 temporary easements. Vague enough to park a parade through. But bylaws can't redraw a line a surveyor already drew." "Then, how does their plat get away with it?" "It doesn't," she said, and laid down a second sheet with a stamp that had no soul. "That is a placeholder seal. It means someone uploaded a copy and a clerk marked it received. It doesn't mean reviewed." She pointed to a tiny rectangle. "And when you zoom the corner, your fence post is a box not on any common." Someone just highlighted the road and hoped you'd be too tired to notice the geometry. I was tired, I said, and a little angry. "Both are the HOA's favorite weather patterns," she said dryly. "They build their umbrella sails around them." The waitress poured us both coffee without asking. "Top off, Lena," she said. "Bless you, Margot," Lena said then to me. "Do you have the filing receipt?" I slid it over. She held it up to the light, checking the faint print at the bottom. "See that number? CP14V end. That's not county, that's a vendor. So the vendor uploaded and called it county. Close enough to scare most people," she said. Far enough to fall apart in a hearing. She circled a line on the bylaws page. "For the purpose of safety maintenance and access, the association may request temporary passage over private lanes." Request Walt, not claim, not seize, not bolt. "Request," I said, feeling the word sit cleaner in the mouth. She took a sip, made a face, and reached for sugar. "Tell me about the iron." "In the ditch under the willow roots," I said. I didn't tug it, just looked until I was sure I wasn't seeing a rock. "Good," she said. "Don't move a thing. If we find it tonight, we photograph, measure, and note. Chain of custody is for paper and for dirt. Tonight," she nodded, "less traffic. Nobody to kick it, nobody to adjust it. I'll bring a tape a level and a cheap metal detector for show. The tape is the truth." She tapped the deed again. "And this?" The jukebox tried another song and behaved. Forks clinked. Someone laughed at the counter about a mower that wouldn't start unless you played Patsy Cline. Lena moved to the plat and drew a light pencil line beside the beige. "Your sideline here never touches the common ground their map insists on. It hugs your ditch and then breaks toward the old cottonwoods. That's field note thinking. It's how surveyors draw when they love the land more than rectangles." "Do you miss it?" I asked. "The counter, the stamps, the smell of carbon paper." "Every day," she said. "But my knees don't miss the basement stairs." She looked at me over her glasses. "You're going to get letters for this. More than you've gotten. They'll sound official. They'll lean on dues, standards, liens, even the phrase community values. I already got failure to comply may result in daily assessment and lien, I said. Doris at the post office called it heavy for paper. Doris is right, Lena said. Keep every envelope. Log each date received. If you email, send yourself a blind copy and print the thread. Nothing frightens bullies like a file they can't edit. Find the PIN, I said, and what file a request for clarification. Find the PIN, she said, and we pull the thread. Margot drifted back, set a plate of pie between us like a truce. On the house, she said, you both look like you're about to do homework. Lena smiled. Civics, extra credit. I chewed red and let the diner's ordinary sounds wash mortar into the cracks. The deeds lines felt like a path home, each call a footstep, each degree a turn I could take in the dark. What about the temporary easement line, I asked. Temporary is not permanent, Lena said, and request is not take. If they want passage, they knock like neighbors. You write a narrow grant for, say, utility access or emergency vehicles, and you record it. You do not? Sharpie a whole lane beige and staple it to fear. I laughed once, surprised. You talk like court, but sound like radio. Warm, but surprised I'm still listening. It's a gift, she said. A county clerk's other job is bedtime stories for adults who forgot the rules. She pushed her tote toward me. Here, copy of the bylaws excerpt in this. She produced a small notebook, ruled paper, the kind you keep in a glove box to remember things before phones were smart. Field notes. We'll write location, time, weather, who present, and what we touched. I'll bring a shovel. A spoon, she said. A shovel spooks people. A spoon says picnic. I grinned. You've done this before. Boundary disputes are 90% posture, she said, and 10% iron. She pointed to the margin of the filing receipt where a clerk had initialed in pencil. That, right there, A human. Find the human and you get the truth faster than through any portal. I looked at the clock above the pass window. The hands stretched toward 9. Outside, the evening had started laying color over the cars in the lot. What time tonight, I asked. Midnight, she said. When the willow listens. Find the pin, I said, and the lie unravels. She held out her hand across the formica. Agreement. Agreement, I said, and we shook like neighbors in a year when that still meant something. The trail cam doesn't lie. At 3:15 a.m., the little screen glowed in my palm and showed 2 figures in reflective vests at my gate, one holding a cordless driver, the other steadying a rectangle of metal. The bolt flashed once like lightning caught in a spoon, and then the sign sat square and satisfied under the willow. At 3:20, out by the ditch, my shovel hit iron with a ring that felt older than anybody's bylaws. Start the note, Lena said softly. Date, time, weather. October, clear 48 degrees, I whispered, because night makes librarians of us all. She clicked her pen. I angled the flashlight away from our faces and into the shallow cut I'd started at dusk. The dirt there smelled cool and rooty like a cellar that knew the names of the people who'd stored peaches in it. Camera first, she said. I held the trail cam up so the lens could stare at the fresh sign and the damp ditch edge. Its red indicator winked like a heartbeat. On the screen, we stepped through the clip, a truck easing without headlights, the quick practiced work, the polite pat on the sign as if it were a good dog. Vendor, I said. Or a board member who thinks they're invisible in a vest, Lena said. Either way, time stamped. She tapped the corner of the screen with her capped pen. 03:15:23. We re-aimed the camera to watch the lane from the willow's perspective, then I nudged the shovel under the roots the way a careful dentist levers a cap. Metal answered again, bright and bell-like. Hold, Lena said. Still, I want the sound on paper. She wrote metallic strike audible. Likely iron cap at described corner. I breathed out and cleared a palm's width of silt. The shovel kissed a circle the size of a silver dollar rust bloom around letters stamped hard enough to outlast weather and opinion. Clean, just enough to read, she said. I brushed with my glove like it was a relic. Letters rose W something, then a number, then the surveyor's tiny cross. The pin tilted slightly as if it had been sleeping on one elbow a long time. That's our corner, Lena said, and the satisfaction in her voice made me feel taller. Photo. Photo, she said. I took 3 closer, and then a wider frame with the willow trunk, the ditch, and my fence post making a tidy triangle. The night held its breath. Somewhere on Main Street, a soda machine thumped a late sale, and the HOA office's second-floor light glowed a dull square like a window that had forgotten how to be night. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" I asked. "That somebody's working past bedtime," she said, "and that we just tucked them in." We stretched the 100-foot tape along the deed's first call. South 47 degrees east, 200, 10 feet. Lena murmured the way a choir mother hums a hymn to hold a room together. The tape slid smooth over grass and gravel. When we set the level, the bubble centered like it had been waiting. I read the tape. 210 on the nose. She lifted the deed copy and held it next to the metal. "Words to world," she said. "World to words," I said back. We measured the sideline to the ditch bend, then to the cottonwoods. Each check matched the calls, as if the surveyor had left us breadcrumbs in degrees. When we finished, I took the flashlight off my shoulder and aimed it up. The willow's leaves were black confetti. Wind moved through them the way sleep moves through a house. "Say it," Lena prompted. "The pin's coordinates match my deed exactly." She smiled. "You'll want to remember this sentence in the morning when the emails arrive like crows." I stood quiet long enough to feel the earth under my boots and the fence wires cold through my jeans where I leaned. Then I said the thing out loud, not to a camera or a clerk, but to the ditch, which has no reason to flatter a man. "Iron remembers what paper forgets." Again, she said, and I did until the sentence belonged to the place as much as to me. We worked through chain of custody like she'd taught in the diner, photos numbered, GPS tagged on my phone, a handwritten field note with both our initials, a sketch that captured the willow, the fence, the culvert, and the little cap with its tired cross. We didn't pry the iron an inch. We let it sleep where the first surveyor laid it down. Now, we don't email a feeling. Lena said, "We email a file." "Who?" first I asked. "County vendor, HOA portal that thinks it's a judge." "Your brother," she said. Subject line, chain of evidence. Attach the clip 3 stills and the field note as a PDF. Put the deed call in the body so anybody skimming can't pretend they missed the meat. "He's off duty tonight." "He's your brother every night," she said. We walked the lane back to the porch, our flashlights low because the sky gave plenty of its own. The church steeple's silhouette looked like a pencil rising from the far end of a notebook. The HOA office still glowed on main patient as an aquarium. A moth swung lazy against the porch light and found nothing to do but try again. Inside, I set the camera by the coffee maker and plugged in the cable. The little screen blinked thought and then offered me the file like a dog dropping a stick. "Folder name?" Lena asked. "Farm Road. Evidence," I said. "Subfolder tonight's date." She nodded. "Now, be a boring man," she said. "Boring men keep good records and win long fights." I typed the email to Tom slow like the words needed to walk on clean floors. Subject, chain of evidence, farm, road time, stamps attached, 03/15/23. Trail cam shows fresh bolt-up at gate. Boundary pin located and photographed. Meets and bounds call matches. Field note, PDF attached. No contact with sign installers, W. "Add the deed call itself," Lena said. "Let the sentence stand like a fence post." I pasted it, in beginning, at a capped iron at the northeast corner of the parcel, thence south 47 degrees east 210 feet to an iron near the ditch by the willow. "Good," she said. "Now, attach and send." I clicked the paperclip, chose files, watched the progress bars fill like slow rain tanks. For a second, I just listened, the coffee maker's tiny clicks, the refrigerator's polite cough, the absolute quiet of 3 in the morning when even trouble gets tired. "You ready?" I asked. "Send it," she said. I hit the arrow. The message left with a whoosh that sounded too bright for the hour. "Now what?" I said. "Now you sleep," she said, gathering her tote. "And in the morning you act like a man with iron under his willow." I walked her to the step. The night pressed cool fingers to my forehead. Down the hill, a lone window on Main still glowed, but it felt different now, like a theater after the audience has gone. I locked the door behind her and glanced once more at the screen. The email sat in the sent folder subject, clear and simple, chain of evidence. I touched the fence post through the window glass the way you pat a sleeping dog, and the house settled around me like a hand around a thermos. The flyer was taped crooked on the bulletin board, half covering last week's potluck sign-up sheet where Deviled Eggs Marlene was still underlined twice. My farm road was drawn in thick blue ink labeled Future Community Access with a cheerful arrow that pointed straight at the willow. Someone had even added a clip art car as if a cartoon could make the lane suddenly belong to everyone. I stood there with a paper plate of lemon muffins I hadn't baked, listening to the coffee urn gurgle and settle. The hall smelled like floor wax and cinnamon. Folding chairs made that shy scrape against linoleum as neighbors drifted in and picked sides without thinking, the side with light from the high windows, the side with the bulletin board, the side with the board members pretending to look busy. By the time the urn went quiet, I had the flyer in my hand and was walking toward the front. It felt like ripping wallpaper off a room I'd painted myself. "This is my road," I said, holding the page above the stack of paper cups as if it needed air. Heads turned the way wheat does in a small wind. First one, then a line, then the whole field. Mr. Harlan, the board chair, said, smoothing his tie as if it had thoughts of its own. "Please take a seat. We'll address community comments during the open period." "Start the open period with the truth," I said. "You used my farm road as a prop." A nervous laugh tittered at the back, then died. The clerk at the side table clicked her pen and looked at a printout that clearly said nothing about any of this. Lena moved from the doorway like a coach called into a game late. She took her spot beside me at the podium and slid a slim folder onto the wood. Inside a still frame from the trail, came the deed call printed clean, a map with the corner enlarged so even a stranger would recognize the post, the ditch, the iron cap with its tired cross. Future Access. I read from the flyer, and the word future felt like a joke you tell when you can't remember the punchline. By what vote? Whose permission? Community Partnerships advises, started the treasurer. "This isn't an ad," I said. A woman from the choir apron still tied under her cardigan raised a hand and didn't wait to be recognized. "That lane runs behind the parsonage," she said. "When my son was 5, he picked chokecherries along that ditch." Future Access, for who? For the subdivision, said the secretary, and the word sounded like a sneeze she hoped wouldn't be hers. A planned connection would alleviate overflow and provide secondary egress. It's standard. In what's standard is the boundary. Lena said, just loud enough to be a bell, but not a gong. We can read the line aloud if it helps. The board chair looked down the table for an ally and found none. "We'll have order, please." I set the flyer on the podium and slid out the photo still. On the screen, the timestamp was clean, 03:15 a.m. Reflective vest, bright as a confession. "This is your order at 3 in the morning," I said. They bolted a sign to my fence in the dark. "You can't prove that's us," the treasurer said, though she didn't look at the picture when she said it. Lena flipped the photograph so the whole room could see, then laid the deed copy next to it like it had always been meant to keep that picture humble. Beginning at a capped iron at the northeast corner of the parcel, she read her voice even as weather thence south 47 degrees east, 210 feet to an iron near the ditch by the willow. The coffee urn clicked once and then gave up even pretending to boil. The room fell quiet in a way that has weight. You could hear the old clock above the stage tick off the beats. I took a breath that felt like a hinge loosening. "I found that iron," I said. "It hasn't moved since a man with a transit and strong calves put it there. Your flyer pretends it doesn't exist." The retired postman cleared his throat. "I delivered mail down that lane 30 years, he said. Trucks turned around at the willow and nobody fussed but the squirrels. A young dad by the door said, I just need a safe way to get my kids to practice without that left turn at the blacktop. If there's a connection, there's a connection, I said. At the intersection with the stop sign we all learned in the 80s. We're modernizing, said the chair. Modernizing doesn't include taking Lena, said sotto voce, but not secret. and bylaws don't redraw survey lines. I unfolded the trail cam transcript we'd typed at my kitchen table and let the paper crinkle like a throat clearing. 3. 1523. Subject bolt sign. At gate. I read 03 15 51. Subject pat sign 03 16 04. Vehicle reverses without headlights. People do maintenance at odd hours, the treasurer said. It's considerate. Less traffic. It's hiding, the choir woman said. She removed her apron like she might need her hands free to clap. Call it what it is. A hand Marlene of the Deviled Eggs went up halfway and then stayed there, unsure if this was math class or family. Who asked Walt? She said, and when no one answered, she let her hand fall. That's what I thought. The chair pinched the bridge of his nose. We can't run the community on exceptions. Standards must be uniform. Uniforms look nice for pictures, I said. This is a road. It has ruts and roots and a cap of iron stamped before your vendor portal learned how to swear. A few people laughed, then looked guilty about laughing in a hall with a piano in the corner. Lena, light as a stage whisper, said, "Find the pin, pull the thread." A teenager with a junior deputy haircut stood near the muffins, both hands sunk into his hoodie. If the map says one thing and the pin says another, which wins? The pin, Lena said. Always. Don't answer hypothetical legal questions, the secretary hissed at her and then blushed as if she had sworn in church. I lifted the flyer again, held it next to the deed call, and watched the blue arrow point at words it couldn't change. Truth doesn't fit on their flyer, I said, the line arriving in my mouth as if the room had written it for me. A ripple of agreement spread like a shiver you don't claim, but don't resist either. Some clapped, some nodded. A few took pictures of the picture modern life endorsing itself. The board chair leaned toward the treasurer, lips barely moving. He doesn't understand process, he murmured, and I recognized the tone meant talking about a fly that wouldn't leave the picnic potato salad alone. Process is the dish, I said. The pin is the table. The clerk clicked her pen again, then set it down and folded her hands as if pen clicking might be used as evidence later. We have an agenda, she said in a softer voice than any of us had given her credit for. But item 8 says public comment. This looks like commentary that won't wait. The chair opened his mouth to object and found nothing he liked in there. 3 minutes, he said. Take mine, said the postman. Mine too, said the choir woman. I'll loan some, said Marlene, and patted the deviled eggs like troops waiting on a bus. I looked at the board, not at the crowd. You could have asked, I said. You could have come up my lane in daylight and said, Walt, we're trying to solve a traffic knot. Can we talk options? I might have said no. I might have said, emergency vehicles only. I might have said, write a narrow grant and pay for the extra gravel. But you didn't ask. You taped a cartoon car to a hall board and called it planning. The treasurer's smile had started to ache around the edges. We relied on professionals. The ones who work at 3:15 in the morning, the postman said. Silent beat the urn, gave a little sigh like it was tired of being the only appliance doing its job. From the kitchen, someone set down a stack of paper plates too hard, and the sound was a clap no one meant to make. Outside, a siren far off wound down to a good night. Let's slow this, the chair said, adopting the reasonableness you keep in a drawer for emergencies. We'll table the flyer. We'll seek clarification from the county. We'll ask the county to bless a line the county didn't draw, Lena said. The upload you relied on has a placeholder seal. Received doesn't mean reviewed. A man at the aisle stood old denim jacket with the elbows going to thread and a cap that had been to more tractor shows than I've been to weddings. I live off Keeler, he said. If you make Walt's Lane a through road, you put my grandkids' bikes in the path of strangers late at night. We've had enough strangers lately. Strangers are just neighbors you haven't billed yet, the treasurer said with a chirp that she thought was lightness. It wasn't. Marlene looked at me like she looks at raw eggs, careful, firm, ready to fix what goes wrong. Walt, tell us the rest. So I did inside the 3 minutes that had grown generous with borrowed time. I described the iron cap under the willow, the chain of custody note with both our initials, the stretch of tape measure settling at 210 like it had been waiting since the surveyor put his tools away. I kept it plain as a recipe flour sugar salt iron. Words match. A man with a real estate polo cleared his throat. Even if legally accurate, he said, like the word accurate tasted bitter. The community has needs. Access points reduce congestion. Reduce congestion to increase car counts on a lane. The county never designed, I said. You're moving the knot, not untying it. Folks, the chair said, trying again to be the adult at a birthday party, we appreciate input. We'll circulate a survey. You already did, said the choir woman. It's the flyer. Who authorized that flyer? The postman asked. The treasurer's smile dropped altogether. It was informational. Whose information? Marlene said. A breeze no one felt moved through the room as something shifted and settled. I watched neighbors look not at me, not at the board, but at the space between us that belongs to all of us, the lane in their minds, the ditch with frogs, the willow that steals your hat if you run too close. Mini cliff, I thought without thinking. My grandfather lined that ditch with stones after the flood of '72, I said. Those stones didn't ask to be moved this morning by a clip-art arrow. The clerk blew out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. I'll minute that she said, and her pen finally wrote something that felt like minutes instead of marketing. Lena nudged the still closer to the board. You can say, not us, until your jaw gets tired, she said, but the camera says otherwise. We can ask the sheriff to request the original file if you prefer. The chair's eyes flicked to me, then to the door, then to a place above the piano where a flag once hung. Let's not escalate. Escalate, I said. You started at 3:15. Lena's hand measured the mic, not touching it, just letting its presence quiet the table. Here's a gentler path. Table the flyer. Send a letter to the county requesting review. Suspend any claim to future access over private property pending that review. Meanwhile, apologize. The treasurer blinked like she'd been told to read a word she hadn't practiced. Apologize for presenting options. For presenting mine as yours, I said. Somewhere a child laughed because somebody tickled him at the worst possible time. A few of us smiled because that's how laughter works. It gets in the cracks and changes the weather. The chair rearranged his stack of papers into neat squares that meant nothing. We will take this under advisement, he said in his courthouse voice. Advisement doesn't unbolt a sign, I said. You can start with that. He looked at his treasurer. She looked at the secretary. The secretary found a pen cap that needed examining. Finally, the chair said, remove the sign. It was almost a sentence. Say it to the room, the choir woman said. Remove the sign, he said again louder. The room clapped because people like clear verbs. Thank you, I said. Now, about the flyer. We'll recycle it, the treasurer said, reaching for the page with a speed that had finally found her hand. I let it go. The bulletin board looked naked without its lie. Silent beat the urn reset itself with a soft click. You could hear the line of coffee settle inside it like rain in a narrow gutter. Somewhere down the hallway a vacuum cleaner came on, and then off someone thinking better of sounding busy when the room had decided to listen. I gathered my papers. I'll send the transcript and images to the county, I said, and to anyone else who thinks pen strokes can move cap irons. The real estate polo man made a note he wanted us to see. We'll need to assess the traffic plan, he said. There's a real need. Needs don't cancel deeds, Lena said. The chair leaned toward the treasurer, voice so low he meant it for no one. You just made it worse for yourself, but hall acoustics are a funny thing. His whisper bounced off the varnished stage and came back twice as big. A few people looked at me the way you do when you watch a storm pick a new direction. I folded the still frame and slid it into my folder. Worse or better, I said, we'll stick with true. And that, more than the clapping, more than the urn's contented sigh, was how the morning decided to end. The courthouse smelled like old oak and floor wax, and every sound seemed to come back twice. When the clerk began reading, her voice spread into the rafters like she'd been hired to speak for the building itself. Temporary injunction, she intoned. Effective immediately. The Homeowners Association is prohibited from claiming access to or control of the road identified as Farm Road. The paper in her hand trembled only slightly, but the words carried more weight than any bolt the board had driven into my fence. I sat on the wooden bench, knees tight against the rail, a styrofoam coffee cup cooling between my palms. Neighbors dotted the pews behind me. Some leaned forward like churchgoers waiting for the refrain, others sat stiff as if unsure whether they were witnessing justice or gossip. The sheriff, my brother Tom, stood near the rail in uniform, a thick envelope in one hand. His badge caught the overhead light in the measured flashes like punctuation on the clerk's monotone. Further ordered, the clerk went on that all activities of the HOA board are suspended pending review. Keys to any office's gates and storage facilities shall be surrendered to the county sheriff until further notice. A low stir rolled through the benches. Someone coughed. Another whispered about time. Tom stepped forward. He laid the envelope on the oak desk, opened it, and tilted the contents out. A ring of keys spilled across the wood. They clattered sharp metal on oak like a dozen small hammers striking at once. The sound lingered until the clerk paused and let it die. That silence was its own kind of punctuation. These keys, Tom said quietly, were turned over this morning by the HOA treasurer. He fanned the ring, with one hand each key shining dull. They represent entry control denial. But under this order, they're simply evidence. The board's lawyer, a man with gray sideburns and an over-polished briefcase, shot up from his chair. Your Honor, I object to this display. Community standards require continuity. The judge, who had listened without leaning, lifted a single finger. The lawyer sputtered into silence. Lena was 2 benches behind me, her notebook balanced on her lap. She wrote quickly, but when the lawyer blurted community standards, she looked up with eyes sharp enough to slice paper. Tom closed the envelope and handed it to the bailiff. Chain of custody, he said the way we'd practiced the phrase. The clerk cleared her throat, resumed. Said injunction shall remain in effect pending a full hearing on property rights to be scheduled within 30 days. My coffee went cold, but I didn't notice until the clerk set the paper aside and tapped it with a flat palm. Filed and entered into record. Neighbors began to shift, murmurs rising like wind after a storm. A man in the back whispered, "That's it, then they can't touch it." I wanted to believe him, but I watched the lawyer's jaw tighten. I saw the board members in the front row sink lower hands on their knees. Defeat was not in their vocabulary. Delay was. Still, for that moment, the air belonged to the court, not the board. Lena leaned forward, caught my shoulder as we filed out. You hear the gavel? I shook my head. I only heard the keys. A gavel weighs more than a gate, she said. Remember that. Out in the hallway, the scent changed from wax to coffee and faint perfume. The bulletin board here carried notices for lost pets' tax deadlines and choir rehearsals. I watched a neighbor tack up a flyer about a chili supper next Friday. Life wanted to keep moving. Tom joined me at the base of the courthouse steps. Don't get comfortable, he said, his voice low enough to keep off the record. This is only step 1. The community room smelled of burnt coffee and casserole foil. I set the county audit down on the folding table, the spreadsheet pages spreading like a map of secrets. The treasurer adjusted his glasses, but the paper carried its own light. The numbers told a story louder than any voice. Neighbors crowded in the bulletin board behind them, curling at the corners with last month's flyers. Someone scraped the bottom of a casserole pan with a fork, a metallic punctuation in the hush. This, I said, tapping the audit with my finger, is where your dues went. And this column, I slid the page toward the board, is where they shouldn't have. The treasurer swallowed. Those were transitional expenses. Call it what you like, Lena said from the second row, her pen already moving. The audit calls them unapproved assessments. The murmurs built into words. We paid for the lawn, someone said. I wrote a check for streetlights. Another voice. Where's the fund for storm drains? The treasurer lifted his chin, but the chair's knuckles were white on the table's edge. Ladies and gentlemen, he began community standards. The room cut him off. Community means us. Not a slush fund. Hands banged against chairs. The casserole pan clattered again, someone dropping a fork in anger. I kept my hand flat on the audit. Refunds are not generosity. They are restoration. The treasurer leaned into the microphone, voice shaking. "Refunds will be issued." The room exhaled as one, and then silence broke when the whole room clapped. Not polite, not scattered, but a wave steady and long enough to make the bulletin board tremble on its thumbtacks. "That's acknowledgement," Lena whispered. I nodded, my throat tight. "That's justice." The board chair waited, face drawn. "This office," he said, voice lower, but still through the mic, remains until ordered otherwise. The applause stumbled into quiet. His words sat like a stone in the casserole pan. Neighbors looked to me, then to Tom at the back of the room, his badge catching the light. The air felt heavier than any spreadsheet. The audit still lay open, the numbers inked too dark to deny, but the fight had not left the board's lips. The morning was sharp with autumn, the kind that makes each breath puff white. Main Street had never looked so full, neighbors lining both sides. Jackets, zipped casserole foil shining from the refreshment table someone insisted we set up. Sheriff Tom stepped to the HOA office door. In his hand, the transfer order county seal raised like an old coin. He pressed it flat against the door, then pulled the tape from the roll with one long rip. The sound cracked in the morning air, loud, sharp, final, as if the building itself were being struck by a gavel. The crowd fell quiet. A few children stopped their chatter. Even the flagpole out front seemed to pause before rattling again in the breeze, halyard clinking against the metal. Tom smoothed the paper down with his palm. Effective immediately, he read, "Voice carrying without a microphone control of all funds, files, and facilities is transferred to the county pending reorganization and refund." The words hung like banners. My farm road and the people who used it were finally written back into truth. Applause began, first hesitant, then steady, a sound like hands testing their strength. Neighbors who'd sat through potlucks and scoldings now clapped for something heavier than muffins. Lena nudged me at the edge of the crowd. "There's your echo," she whispered, notebook closed at last. I nodded, feeling the sound push against my ribs. For months, the only echoes I'd heard were bolts at night and notices in the mailbox. Now, the echo belonged to us. From the office steps, the treasurer appeared, carrying a box stacked with binders. His tie was loosened, his shoulders slumped. Behind him came two staffers with staplers, paper trays, and a potted plant leaning sideways. Each thump on the sidewalk was punctuation, an office being emptied one cardboard sentence at a time. A sheet of paper fluttered loose from the top box, skidding across the pavement. A boy from the choir bent, picked it up, and handed it back without a word. The treasurer accepted it, like a man taking communion. The mayor, wearing her Sunday coat instead of a robe, stepped forward to the easel. A cloth covered the plaque that had waited weeks in the clerk's storeroom. She cleared her throat. "To mark the restoration of Farm Road, and to honor the community that stood together, we dedicate this plaque." Her hand tugged the cloth free. Bronze gleamed in the sunlight. Farm Road, preserved 2024. A road kept is a story told. The words caught in my chest. They looked heavier than the courthouse order, stronger than any tape. Murmurs spread. Then applause again, fuller this time, joined by laughter that sounded like release after a hymn sung too long. Neighbors pressed forward to touch the plaque, fingers grazing the letters like they might read them into memory through skin. A woman in her 80s shawl, wrapped tight, whispered, "My husband drove that lane every day to the mill." She pressed her palm to the bronze. "He'll be glad." I stepped forward too. The plaque was cool edges, sharp weight, undeniable. Iron remembers, paper forgets, but bronze holds. Lena stood beside me, eyes bright. "That line will outlast us both," she said. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and maybe that's enough. The crowd lingered, not rushing. Children darted between legs, someone poured cider, and the bulletin board on the wall now carried the transfer order as its newest, proudest notice. The flagpole rattled again, but softer, like applause in metal. The board chair stood off to the side, lips pressed, face pale. He watched boxes come down the steps, each one a reminder that authority was no longer his. Yet he said nothing. The words he'd thrown at us weeks ago, community standards continuity, seemed as hollow as the empty office behind him. A neighbor leaned near me. "Feels like the building shrank." I smiled, not unkindly. Maybe it just fit itself back to size. Sheriff Tom finished taping the last page inside the door. He locked it with a deliberate turn of the key, the click audible to the crowd. Then he slipped the key into the envelope marked Evidence and handed it to the bailiff. "This office," he said, voice steady but softer now, "is no longer theirs to claim." He turned to me, and though his words carried no microphone, I knew everyone close enough heard. "By sundown, folks'll say the sheriff demolished their office with nothing more than a posted order." Laughter rolled, then applause again, gentler but longer. People didn't want to stop clapping, maybe because they feared the silence might let doubt creep back in. I looked up at the plaque once more. The bronze letters shone steady in the morning sun. "A road kept is a story told." And for the first time since a crooked flyer appeared on the bulletin board, I felt my own story was safe enough to hand forward. The tape on the office door still crackled in my ears louder than any gavel, while the flagpole clinked above us in the wind. I brushed my hand over the bronze plaque, its letters cool and certain, and felt the weight of the restored order like a key turned in place. We had not torn down walls, only posted a notice and stood together, and somehow that was enough to mend more than maps. A road preserved became a story that binds neighbors to one another. Justice isn't loud, it's steady. Share your HOA story. Below your map might help someone redraw theirs.